You can find the Panasonic G6 for around $200 on the used market. And as a matter of fact, this entire video to include what you're seeing right now are clips coming out of the G6 with the Sigma R18-35. The G6 is a micro 4/3 system camera and can capture video at 1080p all the way up to 60 frames per second. This camera is perfect for someone looking at getting into video, but maybe just a little unsure about diving into spending thousands of dollars on a camera. Hey, what's going on, filmmakers, or all of you that are interested in filmmaking? If you stumbled across this channel for the first time, here in this channel we talk about how to utilize some of the latest filmmaking equipment within music video productions. So just keep in mind, most of the content you're going to hear talked about within this channel are most likely related to music video production workflows. So if this is something you're looking at getting into, consider browsing some of the other content within this channel. So just like in most of my other videos, within the description below, you'll find a timestamp, which will take you straight to what the footage looks like coming out of this camera with the Sigma 18-35. But before you dart off, just keep in mind, I'd like to bring just a little bit more context surrounding this entire setup, particularly the lens itself. Now, the reason why I chose to create this video is because the G6 is a camera that was released in mid-2013, making this officially a 6-year-old camera. Now, ironically, the Sigma R18-35mm lens was also released during that very same year. So if we can get these two pieces of equipment to produce a good quality image, that means for just under $1,000, you too should be able to get comparable image quality using a similar setup. Now, by similar setup, I'm referring to any other camera within and surpassing the capabilities of the G6. This includes the predecessor of the G6, which is the G5, which can be had for around $150, all the way up to the GH5, which at the time of this video upload goes for around $1,500 on the used market. This setup also includes a speed booster, and for those of you that aren't too familiar with what exactly a speed booster does, in short, it allows more light to reach your camera sensor by way of a special type of lens. Just think of this lens kind of like a reverse magnifying glass. So this Sigma R18-35, which has a native aperture of 1.8, will now act more like a lens of kind of like a 1.3 or 1.2. So not only are we now afforded the opportunity to allow more light to reach your camera sensor, but our focal lengths are now performed slightly wider as well. So for simplistic reasons, the 18-35 Sigma lens, after applying a ×2 micro four thirds crop factor, would act like a 36 to 70mm lens on a full frame. Now, after we apply the speed booster from Viltrox and throw that into the mix, we now can gain the benefit of a slightly wider focal length, which is going to be around 25 to 50 mils. And just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to talk mainly about Panasonic cameras, particularly because I personally think that Panasonic's produce kind of more of a filmic looking image in comparison to, let's say, Canons or Sonys. Not to say that Canons or Sonys don't produce great images, because obviously they do, but in my opinion, I think they kind of have more of a commercial look to them. Another reason why I've chosen specifically to talk about Panasonic cameras as well is due to the fact that since they do produce more of a filmic look, this would kind of be a perfect candidate to work alongside the Pocket 4K as a B cam. You can obviously match the colors and contrast from clips coming out of the Canons and Sonys and other brands, but just from what I've worked with so far, Panasonic footage organically comes out of the camera looking more like Pocket 4K film footage from the jump, which potentially can save me hours of color grading and matching in post.
I've been feeling restless, this city is relentless. It wears me down and leaves me dry. I could use some water, somewhere that I can wander, where I can finally see the sky. All the noise and all the chaos, I only wanna hear the sound of the earth. I only wanna feel the ground underneath. No pavement, no concrete, just leaves in my heartbeat. I only wanna hear the sound of the earth. Buildings into mountains, streams instead of fountains. Take all the gray and turn it green. People like a sea flowing through the street, passing over me, passing over me.
Now, if you just wanted to see what the footage looks like, then thanks for watching. I appreciate y'all stopping by, and hopefully we'll see y'all in the next video. But for the rest of you, this is a really simple way to get some of your footage looking similar to what you just saw. So let's go ahead and dive straight into DaVinci Resolve, and this is version 16. Okay, now in short, this color grade is assuming you have a basic knowledge of adjusting exposure curves, which will not only bring up your exposure levels within a pleasing range, but will also allow your contrast back into your clips. And since we're shooting so flat, which actually reminds me, right at the end of this grade, I'll drop to you guys what profile settings that I use to film with the G6, which will give you guys that ability to retain just a little bit more information within the shadows and the highlights, as well as give you guys a little bit more flexibility within the color spectrum as well. We're also going to be working within some small white balance adjustments using a waveform, which if you haven't seen before is really super easy to use. Lastly, what we're going to get into is shifting some colors around just a little bit, just to kind of add a little bit of a stylized look to our clips using the log color wheels. All right guys, so let's go ahead and jump straight into our color tab. And within our color tab, what we're going to focus on is the custom curves portion located on the middle bottom portion of the color screen. Before we do that, go ahead and hit Control-Shift-W, which is going to open up your scopes. And on the drop down menu on the upper right, just make sure that you are displaying your waveform scopes. What this is going to do is it's going to allow you to scientifically kind of see where your deepest shadows lie. And this is kind of a super important thing to do because the fact that every screen is slightly different in many ways. So making adjustments using this waveform, especially within the exposure curves, just kind of ensures that your final product is going to look relatively the same throughout any screen or any platform that it's viewed on. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the very bottom portion of this curve, which represents our deepest shadows, and we're going to go ahead and drag it towards the right while looking at the bottom part of our waveform simultaneously until the lower portion of the shadows reach just above that zero line. And just make sure that you just don't adjust this too far over, because what will end up happening is you'll end up crushing your blacks and losing information within your deepest shadows. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and do the exact same thing to the highlights if needed. Keep in mind, depending on your scene, you may not even need to adjust your highlights, or you may even in some cases need to actually bump them up, especially in some low light scenes. At any rate, for this scene specifically, I'm just going to go ahead and drag down my highlights just to add a little bit of detail back into the sky here. Now, the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is add a little bit of contrast to this clip by simply clicking on the curve somewhere just above the middle, dragging it up, which will actually add some overall exposure to the entire image. And then on the opposite end, just below the halfway mark, we're also going to lower some of the shadows. And this is what's going to create this kind of a contrasty look, which is basically adding the contrast back into your clips. A good way to determine whether or not you're kind of going too far with this is to refer back to your waveforms. And if it appears like the overall information within the waveform is getting stretched out too thin, whether it's within the lighter or darker portions, we kind of know we're kind of taking it too far. So kind of a rule of thumb here is to simply spread out the waveforms as evenly as possible and not stretching them out too far. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go over to our temperature adjustments on the left bottom pane. You may have to click on the little 2 within this pane to actually display our temperatures. And then all we're going to do is simply look at our waveform, and what you're going to see in this particular example is the red upper portion of the waveform is kind of higher than the green and the blue. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click and drag this temperature over to the right. And what this is going to do is just going to add a little bit of blue back into our entire scene, which will actually balance out this scene evenly. All you have to do is look at this waveform until you kind of get it to appear white and not have it so that the blues on the top or the greens on the top or the reds on the top. You kind of want it to appear white overall. Okay, now that we've made these color corrections, we can now properly shift around certain colors we want in order to achieve a specific look. And for this look, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a simple teal and orange grade, with this grade leaning slightly more towards green appearing within the highlights. Okay, so next within the same color pane, what we're going to do is add some saturation back into our clips right here, and all I'm going to do is simply add in just enough saturation to make objects and subjects appear kind of natural. I normally start to drag my saturation levels up until I feel that my overall image appears natural, and then I slightly roll it back. And the reason why I roll my saturation back after I realize it looks natural is because I'm going to end up adding some additional boosting within certain colors. We really want these colors to stand out amongst the other colors. So making sure that that saturation isn't up too high will ensure that when we go back in and accentuate some of these colors that we want to boost within our actual color contrasting portion, that we're going to go ahead and really kind of see those colors stand out. Okay, now let's go ahead and add in another node by hitting Control S, and then let's make a further color adjustment within this node. Let's go ahead and go back into our curves adjustment, and let's focus right here on our green curve specifically. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add just a hint of green back into our highlights right here. And then zero the curve back out throughout our midtones and shadows. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pretty much do the same thing to our red curve, except what we're going to do is we're going to drop some reds out right here on the low end. And then lastly, for our curve adjustments, we're going to go ahead and go to our blues and raise our blues up slightly in the shadows, and then zero them back out in within the midtones and highlights. Now, right here would be considered an extremely basic kind of teal and orange stylized color grade. Now let's shift over back into our color wheels, ensuring our log wheels are up and not our primary wheels. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and add in just a little bit more contrast within the colors. So once again, let's go ahead and add another node by hitting Control S. And let's go ahead and label this one. Let's label this one color contrast. And this is kind of an additional, this is kind of adds like a little bit of a creative style to your clip. And so let's go ahead and make some minor adjustments to our offset wheel initially. And what we're going to do is we're going to lean towards the aqua side right here. And then let's take our highlight. Let's take our highlight slightly over into the green, our midtones slightly up and over into the orange or red territory. And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and slide some of these purples over into our shadows just a little bit. And keep in mind, guys, these are really super minute adjustments. Most of the time, you should just barely be able to see any significant change throughout any adjustment that you do for the most part. Okay, now as a final touch, what I'd like to do is ask myself a question. And this question is, especially if you have people in your shot, which for me is about 85 to 90% of my clips. So how does their skin look overall? Just take a look at their skin. And if you look at their skin and you figure that you kind of want their skin to pop out just a little bit more, then here's what we can do. We can simply head back into our curves adjustment. Specifically, our hue versus hue is what we're going to be taking a look at here. So let's go ahead and add in one last node here in between the first and second node. And let's go ahead and label this node skin tones. For our skin tones, we just want to make sure that we apply any skin tone adjustments prior to any color grading nodes. That way, any other color grading adjustments you make in later on nodes don't affect the actual skin tone node. Hue versus hue adjustment line right here. Now, the first thing that happens to your mouse is going to go ahead and turn into an eyedropper. Now, what DaVinci is essentially needing is more information. It's basically asking you which hue would you like to adjust. Now, obviously here we're looking into our skin tone hues. So let's go ahead and choose the area of the skin, which most of the time I actually find a great place to choose on the skin is right at the meaty portion of the cheek. And typically I try and stay away from like higher portions of the face, like the cheekbones or the forehead, because these are typically areas that have the tendency to retain a lot of highlight information. So after we've chosen our skin tone, we now see that DaVinci has more or less chosen an area for us to begin our adjustments within the line segment here. What I'd like to do is I'd like to see a little bit more red into our skin tones just to add a little bit more life and warmth back into them. And right about here should do the trick. And once again, small adjustments, these can go a long way. And here's what we're looking like before and after. So as you can see, guys, it's just a really nice and pleasant overall color tone to this clip. And at the same time, it's not overdone. Quick tip here at the end of our color grade, let's go ahead and head over into our sat versus sat. And what we're going to simply do is desaturate all of the colors out of our deepest of the deepest shadows and our highest of the highest highlights. What this is going to do for our footage is just going to add an overall cleaner look, because if we actually take a look at the deepest shadows and the highest of the highlights, there should not be any color at all within these exposure ranges whatsoever. Now, lastly and most importantly, both of these cameras share the same lens mounting system, which enables me to share resources between the two cameras. So when I originally was taking my Sony a7 III and then would think about putting it alongside of my Pocket 4K, neither of these cameras have anything compatible that can mutually support each other. With this combination, I can now swap lenses between the two cameras as well as get that matched footage as an added benefit. Another option you can actually think of too when deciding which camera to set up in tandem and run with the Pocket 4K is the Canon. With using the Sigma 18-35mm, this also enables me the compatibility with the EF lineup of lenses. And also within the EF lineup of lenses, this affords you kind of a limitless solution for affordable yet high quality glass, retaining that ability to share lenses between the two cameras as well. However, in my opinion, Canon colors and contrast produce more of kind of a commercialized look, which to me just doesn't match quite well with the Blackmagic's filmic look. Now, I can't stress to you guys enough that it's not that I feel that Canons don't produce great images, because quite honestly, I think they produce some of the best looking overall images for most projects. I just think that they kind of live within more of the commercial lineup of workflow than the Panasonic and Blackmagic, which in my opinion live a little bit more in the creative space. All right, guys, so in the last video, we talked about the Laowa 9mm f2.8. I kept saying 0.28, by the way. It's 2.8 using the Pocket 4K. And yo, this can be actually a lethal combination that focuses on your wide angle shots, most importantly, without any distortion at all in the image. I also ran a short performance clip from a recent music video project that I was able to do. And so if you didn't get a chance to check that out, you can check the full video out right here. Other than that, guys, if you had any questions about any of the camera settings that I used, or I simply sped through some of the information in DaVinci, just hit me up in the comments below or hit me up on SCG Filmmakers. You guys can send me a DM. I'd be more than welcome to talk back and forth with you on direct message. But that's about it for this video, guys. Once again, thanks for stopping by and happy filmmaking.